My hand closed around the bill before I even understood what was happening. $50. Crumpled, slightly damp from his palm. My older brother stood there grinning at me in front of 43 engineers, 3 project managers, and the entire mission operations floor of Johnson Space Center, and he said it loud enough for the back row to hear. For a real coding boot camp, sis. Try Python this time. The free YouTube tutorials clearly aren't cutting it. The laughter started in the front. A couple of his buddies from his startup, the ones he brought as guests, snorted into their plastic cups of champagne. Then it rippled outward, awkward and uncertain, because most of the people in that room didn't know me by name. They knew me by my badge. They knew me by the call sign that came through their headsets at 2 a.m. when a thruster misfired on a satellite 300 miles up. But they didn't know my face. Not yet. Not until 40 minutes later, when the man in the dress blues walked through the double doors at the back of the floor and the room went so quiet, I could hear the hum of the cooling systems under the consoles. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Margot. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my adult life, my own family has believed I'm what my mother politely calls still figuring it out. I went to MIT on a full ride. I came home for Christmas my sophomore year, and my stepfather asked me if they had any regular jobs lined up after I finished my computer thing. I told him I was double majoring in aerospace and electrical engineering, and he nodded the way you nod at a child describing an imaginary friend. That set the tone for the next 14 years. I have one brother. His name is Bryson, and he's 4 years older than me. Bryson was the golden child long before I was old enough to understand what golden children were. He played varsity football at the high school where my stepfather taught woodshop. He had a smile that opened doors. He had a way of leaning back in a chair like the world owed him the space. After college, he started a small software company that built check-in apps for dental offices, and 3 years ago, when he sold it for a number that was more than 0 but less than what he tells people at parties, he became, in my family's eyes, the family success, the one who made it, the one who proved that you didn't need to be book smart, you just needed hustle. I worked for the United States government. I'd been doing it since I was 23. I couldn't tell them what I did. Not the specifics. Not the program. Not the building I went to most mornings, which sat behind 2 layers of fencing and a guard booth that scanned my retina before the gate ever lifted. So I told them I worked in satellite systems. I told them I did software for NASA contractors. I told them whatever I could legally say, which is to say almost nothing, and they filled in the rest themselves. What they filled in was this, that I was a low-level coder, that I sat in a cubicle somewhere outside Houston and wrote little patches for other people's bigger projects, that I made fine money, but nothing impressive, that I was, in essence, a glorified IT girl who'd wasted her MIT degree because she didn't have the guts to start her own thing like Bryson had. I never corrected them. You don't correct people who don't ask. The thing about working in a classified program is that the silence becomes a habit. You don't talk about your day at work. You don't tell your mother that you spent 10 hours debugging telemetry from an asset whose orbit appears on no public registry. You don't tell your aunt at Thanksgiving that you sat in rooms with people whose names are not their names. So you start telling people you had a pretty quiet day. You start saying just the usual stuff. And after a few years, the silence calcifies into a personality. You become the quiet daughter. The one who never quite found her voice. The one who lets her brother do all the talking at dinner. I let him talk. I let him do it for years. The Thursday before everything happened, my mother called me and said Bryson was getting a special honor down at the Space Center. His startup had been one of the small vendors that supplied a piece of administrative software to a contractor that worked with NASA, specifically a scheduling tool for one of the public outreach divisions. It was, by any reasonable measure, a tiny piece of business. But Bryson had spun it into a story about how he was supplying NASA, and the local Houston paper had picked it up, and someone at the agency's PR shop had decided it would be good optics to invite him down for a vendor spotlight event. They were going to give him a small certificate. He was going to give a 15-minute talk. The whole thing was, in the grand scheme of things, a courtesy. He told the family he'd been invited to address NASA's leadership. My mother cried on the phone telling me about it. Margot, honey, she said, you should come. Bryson wants the whole family there. He even said you can meet some of the people. Maybe network. You never know. I almost said no. I knew what would happen. I had seen this movie before. Every Christmas, every birthday, every single time my brother got within 10 feet of any kind of audience, he would find a way to use me. He would make me the foil. He would point at me and say, "And meanwhile, my little sister still hasn't figured out what she wants to do." And the family would laugh, and my mother would touch my arm and say, "She's still finding herself." And I would smile the way I had learned to smile. Closed mouth. Distant. Like a portrait of a woman, not a woman. But here's the part that twisted my stomach. The event was at my building, not literally my building. The vendor spotlight was at the main visitor-facing campus, the part with the gift shop and the kid tours. My actual work happens elsewhere. But the event was going to be hosted by people I knew. People who had stood with me through 8 straight nights once, through a crisis I cannot describe, who had brought me coffee at 3 in the morning and told me they trusted me with their careers. The deputy administrator was scheduled to attend, so was the director of flight operations, and so was a man I will call only the commander because his actual title is long and most of what he does is not public, and I owe him too much to say more than that. These were my people. And my brother was going to come into their house and humiliate me on their floor. I didn't tell anyone at work. Not at first. I considered just not going. I considered being sick. But my mother had bought a new dress, and my stepfather had washed the truck, and my aunt was flying in from Phoenix, and I knew that if I bailed, the story would become Margot was jealous of her brother's success and couldn't even show up. So I went. I drove down on a Friday morning in October. The Houston heat was already broken by then. There was a crispness in the air that didn't belong to the Gulf Coast. I wore a navy dress. Simple. Nothing flashy. I left my badge at home, which I would later realize was a mistake. But at the time felt like a small mercy. I didn't want to be the woman explaining her credentials to her own family. Bryson was already there when I arrived, holding court near the lobby. He had brought 4 of his buddies, all of them dressed like men who had recently discovered Allbirds. My mother fussed over him. My stepfather slapped his back. My aunt asked him questions about his deal with NASA, and Bryson rolled his shoulders back and answered in the patient, slightly weary tone of a man pretending he isn't enjoying the attention. When he saw me, he opened his arms wide. "There she is," he said, "the family genius. Still saving the world one spreadsheet at a time." His friends laughed. My mother laughed. I smiled, the portrait smile. "Hi, Bryson." He pulled me into a hug that was more performance than affection. Then he held me at arm's length, looked me up and down, and said, "Did you get the dress on sale? It looks nice," I said. "Thanks, it's new." He winked at his friends. Big spender. We walked into the event hall together. I remember the smell. NASA buildings have a particular smell, this combination of recycled air and carpet adhesive and faintly burnt coffee from the urns they wheel out for every event. The room was set up with round tables, maybe 20 of them, and a small stage at the front with a podium and a blue backdrop with the agency seal. There was a slideshow looping behind it showing photos of Earth from orbit. Beautiful, soft images of clouds and oceans. I recognized half the people in the room. 2 of them recognized me. A woman from the operations team, Yvette, did a tiny double take when our eyes met. I gave her a small, almost invisible shake of my head. She understood. She turned back to her conversation. A flight director named Holcomb saw me near the punch bowl, started to wave, and then read my face and let his hand drop. He nodded once. I nodded back. My family had no idea any of this was happening. To them, I was just standing there awkwardly while Bryson worked the room. The vendor spotlight ceremony started around 11. Someone from PR got up and gave a short talk about the importance of small business partners. They called Bryson up. He walked to the stage with that loose-limbed swagger of his. He took the microphone. He thanked his team, which was 3 people. He thanked his wife, who wasn't there because they were going through a separation he hadn't told the family about yet. He thanked his vision. Then he said, "And before I take any questions, I just want to acknowledge my family in the back. My mom, my stepdad, my Aunt Wilma, and my little sister Margot, who works somewhere around here too, doing some kind of, satellite stuff. She's been quietly grinding away for a decade trying to figure out her place in this world, and I just want to say I'm proud of her for showing up today." The room chuckled. The way rooms chuckle when they aren't sure something is a joke. I felt my face go hot. I kept the portrait smile. He held up a hand and reached into his jacket pocket. "Actually, you know what?" he said. "Margot, come up here for a second." I shook my head very slightly. He waved me forward. My mother nudged me. The whole room turned to look. I felt the floor tilt the way it does when the lights are on you and there is no graceful way to disappear. I walked up. Bryson put his arm around my shoulders. His cologne was strong. He smelt like a man who wanted to be a brand. "This is my baby sister," he said into the mic. "Smart as a whip. Went to MIT, can you believe it? But she's been stuck at the same job forever, and I keep telling her, Margot, you gotta take a real chance on yourself. So." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded $50 bill. He pressed it into my hand. He closed my fingers over it. He smiled at me with the warmest, most condescending smile I have ever seen on the face of a relative. "Here, for a real coding boot camp, sis, try Python this time. The free YouTube tutorials clearly aren't cutting it." There was a beat of silence. Then his friends laughed. Then a few other people laughed, uncertain, scattered. Then someone in the back of the room, someone I could not see, said, very quietly, "Jesus Christ." I stood there. I felt the bill in my hand, damp at the edges, crumpled. I felt 43 pairs of eyes from my own team, my own people, on me. I felt my mother's pride from the front row because she did not understand what had just happened. She thought he had given me a gift. She thought he was being generous. And I made a decision in that half second that I would later think about for years. I did not take the bill and throw it. I did not slap him. I did not say anything at all. I closed my hand around it. I gave the room my portrait smile. I said, "Thank you, Bryson." I walked back to my seat. I sat down. I folded my hands in my lap with the bill tucked underneath them. And I waited. I waited because I knew something he didn't know. I knew the schedule. I knew the commander was on it. The commander was not supposed to speak. He was scheduled to be present, that was all. A courtesy attendance. A photograph at the end. But I knew the man, and I knew that he had read the bios of every vendor coming through that day. The way he read every piece of paper that crossed his desk. And I knew that there was a non-zero chance, when he looked out at that room, that he would see me sitting at table 11 and decide that something needed to be said. Bryson finished his speech. He got polite applause. He returned to our table, beaming, and my mother kissed his cheek. My stepfather said, "Attaboy." My aunt asked him for a selfie. He posed. Lunch came out? Chicken or fish? I ate neither. I drank water. I waited. Somewhere around 12:45, the PR woman returned to the stage and said, "Before we wrap, we have a special, unscheduled remark from one of our senior leaders." The double doors at the back opened. He walked in. Dress blues, ribbons across his chest in 3 neat rows. He was 61 years old, with the kind of posture that comes from 40 years of standing in front of people who outrank you and people who don't. The room rose to its feet without being asked. My family did too, because everyone else was doing it, even though they had no idea who he was. He walked to the podium. He didn't go through the front. He came right down the center aisle, past the round tables, and as he passed table 11, he slowed for 1/2 second and looked at me, just at me. He nodded. Then he kept walking. I felt Bryson beside me stiffen. He didn't know what he had just seen. But he had seen something. The commander reached the podium. He set down his hat. He did not take notes from his pocket. He gripped the sides of the lectern in both hands and he said in that gravel-soft voice of his, "Good afternoon. I apologize for the interruption. I had not planned to speak today, but I find that I cannot leave this building without saying something. So bear with me." The room sat down. "I came in this morning," he said, "and I was told there was a vendor spotlight event happening on the public side of campus. I always try to walk through these events when I can. We don't say it enough, but our small partners are what allow us to do the work we do. So I wanted to be here to recognize the businesses we work with." Bryson sat a little straighter. "But," the commander said, "I also wanted to be here because I was told that a member of one of our own teams would be in this room today as a guest in a personal capacity, sitting with her family." My mother shifted in her seat. She was confused. She did not yet understand who he meant. "It is not our usual practice," the commander continued, "to recognize a member of our team in a public setting like this. Many of the people we rely on most do work that cannot be discussed. And we honor that work by keeping their names out of the news. But every once in a while, we have to balance the things we cannot say against the things that must be said." He turned his head slowly until he was looking at table 11. He looked at me. He said, "Dr. Margot Lindstrom Beauchamp, will you please stand?" The room stopped breathing. I stood. I did not look at Bryson. I did not look at my mother. I looked at the commander because that was the only safe place to put my eyes. The commander said, Dr. Lindstrom Beauchamp is the chief systems architect for the program we do not name in this room. She has held that role for 6 years. She holds 2 doctorates from MIT in aerospace engineering and applied mathematics. She is, in plain English, the person responsible for ensuring that certain national assets continue to function. I cannot tell you what those assets are. I cannot tell you what those assets are. I can tell you that without her and the team she leads, this country would be measurably less safe than it is today. My mother made a small sound, like a question that didn't finish. The commander said, Last year, Dr. Lindstrom Beauchamp received the Distinguished Civilian Service Award. The ceremony was held in a closed room. There was no press release. There were no photographs. There were 11 people in attendance, including the Vice President of the United States. She did not tell her family. She is not permitted to tell her family. She does not tell anyone. I felt my brother go very still beside me. Today, the commander said, I'm told there was an exchange in this room. A gift was given. $50, I believe, for coding lessons. He paused. He let the silence sit. I would like to formally state on the record that Dr. Lindstrom Beauchamp does not require coding lessons. I would also like to state that her base compensation, before the various classified duty supplements, exceeds the gross annual revenue of most of the vendors in this room. I mention this not to embarrass anyone. I mention it because I have watched for many years this woman accept slights and dismissals from people who do not have the security clearance to understand what she does for a living. I have watched her smile through it. I have watched her come back to work the next day and protect those same people who do not know they are being protected without ever asking for thanks. He stopped. He cleared his throat once. It was the only crack I'd ever seen in him, and I have decided, he said, that I'm tired of watching it. He looked at me. He said, Welcome, Dr. Lindstrom Beauchamp. Welcome to a room that finally gets to know your name. He saluted me. The commander of the program saluted a civilian in dress blues in front of a public NASA event, which is a thing that does not happen, which is a thing I have never seen and will never see again. The room rose. The whole room. 43 of my colleagues and my mother and my stepfather and my Aunt Wilma and my brother's 4 friends in their allbirds, all of them on their feet. There was no applause. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of standing that happens at funerals. I sat down. Bryson was still standing. He didn't know what to do with his hands. The $50 bill, which I had set on the table next to my water glass, was sitting between us. He looked at it. He looked at me. His mouth opened and then it closed. And then it closed, and then it opened again, and what came out was not a word. It was a small sound. The kind of sound a person makes when the floor has gone out from under them and they have not yet hit the bottom. My mother turned to me. Her hands were trembling. She said, Margot. I said, I couldn't tell you, Mama. I'm sorry. She started to cry. Not the proud cry. A different cry. The cry of a woman realizing she has spent 14 years not knowing her own daughter. After the event, people came up to me, quietly. They didn't make a scene. The director of flight operations shook my hand and said, Ma'am, in a way she had never said it before, and I told her, please go back to calling me Margot. Yvette hugged me. Holcomb gave me a small, formal nod and said, about time. Bryson cornered me in the parking lot. He was pale. His friends had already left. He had taken off his blazer and was holding it in one hand like a dead animal. He said, Why didn't you tell me? I said, I'm not allowed to. He said, I'm not allowed to. He said, but why didn't you hint? I would have. I said, you would have what, Bryson? He didn't have an answer. I said, you wouldn't have done anything differently. You would have just bragged about me instead of bragging at me. And I don't want either. I want a brother who treats me the same, whether I'm a janitor or a general. You haven't been that for a long time. Maybe never. He started to cry. It was the first time I had seen him cry since our dog died when I was 9. I did not move to comfort him. I let him stand there. My mother walked over. She had been waiting at a polite distance. She took my hand. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, I'd like to start over, if you'll let me. I said, We can try. My stepfather stood 10 feet away looking at the asphalt. He had not in 14 years asked me a single real question about my work. He had not asked because he had decided, very early on, that there was nothing to ask. When I walked past him to my car, I stopped and I waited, and he didn't look up, and I realized that some things don't get fixed in a parking lot. I got in my car. I drove home. When I got there, I sat on my kitchen floor in my navy dress and I cried for an hour. Not the cry of a woman who had won, the cry of a woman who had finally, after a very long time, been seen. In the weeks that followed, things changed. Slowly. My mother started calling me on Sundays, and instead of asking when I was going to settle down, she asked me what kind of week I'd had. I couldn't tell her, of course, but she asked. That was new. My Aunt Wilma sent me a card. Inside it she had written, "I am sorry I did not ask better questions." Bryson did not call for 6 weeks. When he finally did, he asked if we could meet for coffee. I said yes. We met at a place near my apartment. He looked older. He told me his marriage was ending. He told me his business was smaller than he'd been pretending. He told me he had been, for most of his life, terrified that I was the smart one and that if anyone ever noticed, he would have nothing left. I didn't forgive him at the table. Forgiveness isn't a thing you hand someone over coffee. But I told him I was willing to know him. The real him. Not the version with the loose shoulders and the Allbirds friends. He cried again. He cried a lot more easily now. I kept the $50 bill. I have it in a small frame on the shelf above my desk at home. I look at it sometimes when I'm working late, when the screens are bright and the building is quiet and I am the only person who knows what's happening. 300 miles above our heads. I look at it and I think about the woman who walked back to her seat that day with that bill in her hand, and I think about how close I came to staying her forever. The portrait. The quiet one. The sister who let her brother talk. I think about what the commander said, about being tired of watching it. And I think, sometimes, that the most important moment of my life was not the moment he saluted me. It was the moment, half a second before I walked up to that stage, when I made the decision to keep my hand closed around that bill and trust that the truth would arrive in its own time, on its own terms, carried by the right voice. The truth doesn't need you to shout. It just needs you to stop apologizing for it. That's what my mother says now when she calls on Sundays. She says it like she's quoting someone. I don't have the heart to tell her she's quoting me. I think about that $50 bill almost every day. It sits in a small wooden frame above my desk now, and on the hard nights, the nights when a thruster is misbehaving at 3 a.m. and I have not slept in 19 hours, I look at it and I remember the woman who walked back to her seat with it folded in her palm. I almost stayed her. That is the part that haunts me. Not what Bryson did, not what my mother failed to ask for. 14 years. The part that haunts me is how close I came to spending the rest of my life apologizing for a job I was never allowed to name. What I have learned is that every quiet humiliation we accept is a small payment we make toward a debt we did not borrow. I paid that debt for a very long time. I paid it in Sunday phone calls where I said just the usual and let my mother fill in the blanks with disappointment. I paid it in Thanksgivings where I let my brother make a joke at my expense because making a scene felt worse than swallowing the cut. I paid it in birthdays where my stepfather did not ask a single question about my year, and I let him not ask, because asking would have required him to imagine a daughter he had decided not to have. Every payment seemed small in the moment. They were not small. They were a slow erosion of my own face. The cause was not Bryson. Bryson was the symptom. The cause was that I had agreed, somewhere in my early 20s, that being good at my work was a private matter, and that being undervalued was the price of being trusted. I confused humility with disappearance. They are not the same thing. Humility is knowing the size of your work and not needing it on a billboard. Disappearance is letting people who love you live with a stranger because the truth feels like a burden. The commander did not save me that day. I want to be very clear about that. He gave voice to something I had earned in private, and that mattered. But the real change happened in the half second before I walked up to that stage, when I decided to keep my hand closed and trust the long arc of my own life. That half second was mine. Nobody handed it to me. It was the cumulative weight of every classified night, every silent achievement, every refusal to make myself smaller than I already was being asked to be. So if you are watching this and you are the quiet one in your family, the one who's been miscast, the one whose work cannot be explained at dinner, I want you to hear me. You do not owe anyone a smaller version of yourself. Do the work. Do it without apology. The truth has a way of finding the right room at the right hour, carried by the right voice. Your job is not to shout. Your job is to be ready when the door opens and to walk through it standing up. That is the only kind of revenge worth having. The kind that looks from the outside exactly like becoming who you already were.